Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in the Russian River Valley in Sonoma with Alex Holman, the winemaker at Notre Vue Estate. Welcome, Alex, and tell us about Notre Vue.
Hi, nice to be here. Notre Vue Estate, formerly known as Windsor Oaks, back in the 90s and early 2000s, we changed the name to Notre Vue several years ago, just sort of as a rebranding. We're in the northeast quadrant of the Russian River Valley and actually sort of dead center in the Chalk Hill AVA too. So our full entire estate, 700 acres, encompasses both AVAs, and we discern what AVA we put on the label basically from soil type. So our southern half of our property is more ancient seabed clay soil, and so we give that a Russian River, and that's where all our Chard and Pinot Noir, so it makes sense. And then most of our Bordeaux's, or all the Bordeaux's I use from the property, are in the northeast part of our property, which is Chalk Hill and volcanic soil.
Wow, 700 acres. What's your total planting of that 700?
Right now, about 208. And we're actually, from the Kincaid fires, suffered a lot of damage. So we've gone through a survey and evaluating all our blocks, and some of them had as much as 40 to 50% damage from fire. And so those economically aren't going to work. And so depending on long-term contracts and the people there will determine whether we keep and replant or where we pull out and replant. And then that'll give us allow us to actually put in different varietals and whatnot.
So right now you're doing the Bordeaux varieties and the Burgundy varieties, Pinot and Chard, and you're doing exclusively estate fruit?
Yes, all estate fruit. The estate has 16 different varieties. Right now I process 13 of those 16. The three that I don't produce right now is Muscat, Dolcetto, and Sangiovese, but we have the three main Rhone varieties, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, and all the Bordeaux's and Sauv Blanc and Pinot Chard, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel. I know I'm going to forget something.
We'll add those up. And what is your total case production?
About 5,000. Yeah, I talk in tonnage. So we do about 90 to 100 tons of fruit.
Okay. And where is your wine available? Is it available across the U.S.? Is it direct to consumer only?
Yeah, well, with COVID and everything and the pandemic last couple of years, it's been a little different. And we had a little setback with a structural fire in 2019 where we lost our entire inventory. So within that year of 2019, my first year here as a winemaker, we basically lost all our product, and then therefore we lost all our distribution, and then the pandemic hit, and so we're building back. And so for right now, we have 4 distributors, one in New York, one in Georgia, New Mexico, and then we have brokers in California.
And then direct to consumer.
And direct to consumer is always the best way to go anyway.
So tell me, as Alex, the person, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Yeah, well, I guess my first memory relevant to wine was at the dinner table in the 70s. You know, my dad sort of dabbled in wine, and he used to bring little wine, collector wine for $8 a bottle back then. And so he got into wine there. And so as a big Catholic table, my dad wasn't Catholic, my mom, but, we were able to take a sip and take a smell, and we always had discussions about it. My dad was learning, so we were always talking about it. So that was sort of my first experience just as a kid, and not really being into it. And then And then, how I got to wine is a little different road, that's for sure.
Well, you'll have to share that along the way here. What would you say is one of the most memorable wines you've drunk, or was there a particular wine that set you on the course to becoming a now winemaker?
Yeah, good question. No one in particular as far as that goes. Certainly, I was able to discern that I like Pinot Noir as a teenager more than Cabernet. I can attest to that. But, actually, that nirvana for me sort of came after the fact, after I already sort of chose to do something in wine. I went to Fresno State and I got a degree in chemistry at Fresno State, but then went back for my enology after that. But at Fresno, I did get introduced to Muscat and a lot of different, and I went to school with Herb Quaddy, which his dad is a very famous port maker there in Fresno County. And my first wine job was in Christian Brothers Brandy, so in Reedley. So I did get exposed to some really ancient vineyards from back in the day, and I guess Muscat was sort of my first love affair in the wine business for whatever reason.
No shame in that.
No shame.
You got to fall in love with something, and a little sweet never hurt anyone.
No, right. And and that's the thing, as a winemaker too, I didn't come into this with any, ideas that I was going to change the world of wine. I was more of a scientist, chemist, and looking to do things that both incorporated science and art and agriculture, and wine is obviously the obvious choice. And certainly in Fresno with their program, and my chemistry professor, Barry Gump, was one of the premier enologists in the business. So, I knew about wine, on tangential way, prior to picking wine. So it was always sort of there. And
so when you're not working in the vineyards, what kind of wines do you like to drink? Tend to be more domestic, international?
Yeah. Well, I am stuck on my wines for sure.
I guess that's a good sign.
Yeah, well, they're free. But, I have a lot of friends in the business. I get friendly with all the bottlers, and so we trade a lot of wine there. So I'm more of a Burning Man wine guy, where trades are more appropriate than. And so we do a lot of trading, and so we try to, taste, evaluate each other's wine. But for me, wine's not really my social drink. If you were to ask, I know what. If you were to ask me what's in my refrigerator, that answer would be beer.
Well, I've been told that it takes a lot of good beer to make wine, so.
Yeah. And so, and that's not that I don't drink wine, and I drink a lot of wine. I drink wine all day at work because, my best advice from my mentors were, taste every day. Every time you come across your wine, you put it in your mouth, and so from that perspective, it's always going on in my mind. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm social, I don't necessarily want to bring work to my social club.
Fair enough.
When I put wine in my mouth, it tends to, you tend to start evaluating it and trying to, do what you think. And sometimes you don't want to think about wine.
You had mentioned that you had a kind of first love affair with Pinot Noir over Cab. I know Muscadet was your first love, but do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Well, there's perfect variety for every individual because everybody's palate is different and their taste buds are different, and so I would concur that for any individual, there is possibility to try as many wines, and you will find wines that you like that you never even thought of. And so from that perspective, yes. From a wine that's going to serve all purposes and satisfy all people, yeah, that's probably not going to be the case. But you certainly can find the perfect wine for you if you try.
Mm-hmm. And you seem a little rebellious from the norm. What do you think about wine critics and scores?
Yeah. I've worked for a lot of high-end people, and I've witnessed Robert Parker come into the winery for a tasting, and I'm not going to get into any of that personality stuff, but it certainly is good for the general public to have some guidelines. But 20 years in the business, I've seen, how Wine Spectator works and Robert Parker and certain people, certain critics' palates. They drink a lot of wine. So now you have to say, is a critic's palate the same as a consumer's palate? So am I making wine for the critic or am I making wine for the consumer? And so in a lot of ways, I try not to overdrink wine so that it keeps my palate more like a consumer's in a sense. But if you're drinking multiple heavy wines every day, then yeah, you get Winery 101, don't get cellar palate.
So I know you said you drink a lot of beer, but if you had to choose, red, white, or rosé?
Yeah, I was one of the first on the rosé bandwagon. I got onto rosé before rosé was cool, and and I wasn't afraid to have
pink
20
wine.
Pink wine or even garnet rosé that had 24-hour skin contact. That by color everybody thinks it's sweet, but by flavor it's like nothing you've ever seen before. And I do feel that the consumer has detracted a little bit from the rosé palette, so to speak, because everyone wants such a lighter color, and then that always leads to less skin contact, which would decrease the complexity or the variability of the style. So it is what it is, but there's plenty of dark rosés out there. Just never think that a dark rosé is going to be sweet. Don't make that
Here, I
mistake.
fully agree with you. Never judge a rosé by its color. So we're sitting here in the middle of your property, which I have to say has some of the most spectacular views ever. And sitting among your 700 acres, imagine if space aliens landed right now on your property, and which of your wines would you want to welcome them with?
Yeah. I guess the canned answer is we make a really great sparkling GSM rosé, and so from that perspective, it's going to be a celebratory thing. It's going to be that if they come in peace or they come in war. But certainly, I'm really falling in love. This is my first experience to make a full GSM blend, and I've made a full program. I did a sparkling rosé, still rosé, and a red, and I've never been able to have all three, the Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre together, and so I'm really having a lot of fun building that program and learning about how, and I'm doing it in a little different way. I am co-fermenting everything, and so everything's picked on the same day. It all goes into the same tank, and so that's more of an old vine Zen technique. So you really do have to focus on the day you're picking, because this the still rosé we're drinking right now is 33% of each, and just 1 ton of each variety. But the Syrah was at 24 bricks, the Grenache was barely 23, and the Mourvedre was 21, and then you would never have picked any one of them probably on that day, but together it really came together. And that's where the co-fermentation idea and that aspect leads to the creativity and the artistic nature of your action. And now that's a unique wine because Mother Nature's never going to produce those three phenolic ripenesses on that same day, probably ever again. So now you're adding.
So you're saying that maybe you'd want to welcome them with the rosé or the red wine, huh?
Yeah, right.
You're just not sure which GSM.
Yeah.
But 3 styles to choose from. So, you're working on a large property. I know you've only been at this property since 2019, but you've been in the valley for much longer. You said 20 years in the industry. So each vintage tells a different story. Do you find that more things repeat themselves or the opposite of that?
Yeah, well, and it does depend on what part of the county you're in, because I spent several years in Petaluma in the South Sonoma County in Petaluma Wind Gap, and that then you're not necessarily exposed to the extremes you are up here in Windsor and Hillsburg, whereas the biggest change that I've seen in the last 5 years is the wind, and the offshore winds bring in hot air at the absolute wrong time, and leading to fires and all kinds of mayhem. And so the wind is what is affecting our ripeness. And so the last couple of years, there's been a couple of times where it's been a perfect year, and then all of a sudden you get 2 or 3 weeks of really crazy weather, and you don't get phenolic ripeness. And so, I'm sort of old school that I really want 40 days of ripeness after veraison. And so I'm trying to count that. It's sort of an old school method, but there's been times where we've only had 30, and you have to pick, otherwise it's going to be 27 bricks. So from that perspective, that's been the biggest challenge, managing your deficit irrigation, but then also not getting exposed to some really heavy heat spikes.
Yeah, so not as much consistency or continuity from year to year.
Absolutely. And what a couple of days throws you off. Was it right? Maybe it was 2018. I went, I left work on Friday and we were at 21 bricks on Pinot, and I'm like, okay, no problem. Went out of town, came back on Monday, and they were 25. And that never usually happens.
Can never say never. So have you established any sort of traditions or good luck rituals to do when harvest is starting?
Yeah, the one that's always followed is the cliche, blessing of the grapes. And it is interesting and fun to see how I've had the well fortune of always be at family-owned wineries. And so I think family-owned wineries always tend to use those traditions a little more readily. It's more personal to them. When you're working in the corporate world, you generally, it's business and liability and all that other. I've had everything from champagne to tequila shots on at 10 o'clock in the morning to bless the grapes. So,
so not one consistent ritual.
It runs the whole gamut. And so and actually our new PR gal is, we are trying to start some multi-religious blessings, and not just be Christian blessing, and have, a rabbi and, another, shaman and whoever we could get. And so, there are plans of making that kind of sort of presentation.
Conscious.
Yeah. But me as a winemaker, and I'm not a desk winemaker, my hands work, and my hands get
very dirty,
very dirty, and during harvest. And so my focus, my ritual during the blessing is always a blessing of safety and making sure that we're all stay safe and we don't get freaked out and don't get all crazy, because, hysterical winemaking is not the way to go about it.
Mm-hmm. So to keep your vines calm, or your wines calm when they're in the cellar, I mean, when you're walking through there, do you talk to the vines and calm them down?
Yeah. Well, yeah, probably not so. I probably talk to myself more than the vines. And yeah, no, I don't get that spiritual to it in that sense, but yeah, I am really trying to get in tune with their growth patterns and get symbiotic with the grapes from that perspective. So, I always walk the vineyards as a naturalist and always looking for bugs and different flowers and whatnot, and making sure where that our biodiversity is good, and it doesn't take you long to find a ladybug and all that kind of stuff. So I try to really stay in tune that way, just as a sort of a naturalist kind of thing.
So Alex, when you're not wandering the vineyard and, keeping busy, what do you like to do in your free time other than drink beer?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the younger Alex would say I played baseball. I played a lot of organized baseball, played in college, and all through my, I played every year till I was 50. So I've played a lot of baseball. I've since retired. My body can't do it anymore. And so, I've got a couple hobbies. I do a lot of gardening. I do a lot of cooking. And currently, I'm actually restoring a 1960 El Camino classic car. So now my car is my new mistress.
Wow. And do you have a baseball team that you're a fan of?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm a San Francisco native, so it's all San Francisco for me. And I was a vendor at Candlestick Park when I was in high school. So yeah, I definitely Giants, 49ers, Warriors.
So when the Giants, 49ers, were to win a championship, which of your wines would you want to give them? Other than the celebrity, maybe it's just the GSM bubbles because that's celebratory. Right. But
yeah, well, certainly for the celebratory, that would be the thing. But if we were gonna say a red wine, I really am becoming a real big fan of our GSM red. It's certainly in Sonoma County. In the Central Valley, there's a lot more of it around, and it's a lot more popular, and you have a lot more diversity. In Sonoma County, there's not too many people doing Rhone varieties and doing blends, and so I do get a lot of satisfaction about people that are used to the local fare. We're in Pinot and Chard country, and cab, and that's all they want to taste. And so when they taste something that's unique and different with flavors that they've never tasted before, it gives me good satisfaction to at least open their eyes to that.
Yeah. So tell me something. Is there a piece of advice that you were given at some point in your life that you try to live by for work or for life in general? And if so, what is it?
Yeah. Well, as a good non-practicing Catholic agnostic, the Serenity Prayer is always the good one. To understand what things you have control of and what you don't, and knowing and having the wisdom to discern the difference. And so, I try not to obsess over too many things. Winemakers are great victims of overanalyzing the situation and always trying to be in control of the situation. And so, as I do most of my wine is all native fermentation, and so from that perspective, my process of native fermentation, a lot of times you have to know more not to do something than to just throw the toolbox at it. Mm-hmm. And there's so many things that you can add, tannins, and I think we've gone overboard with sacrificial tannins. And people go, we've gone overboard with no-till cultivation, because you can't just take one little thing and run with it and say, I'm never doing that again, because sometimes you can't, and you have to there's always a compromise in processing. So,
So the Serenity Prayer. So on that note, when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Well, I guess my current situation is probably what I'm most proud about, simply because 2 months into my job, we lost all inventory. 6 months into that job, we had a fire that caused a 5-day evacuation. And every wine I've produced from that vintage has scored 90 or above from highly regarded critics.
Wow.
And so to say, it's not to say that it's Wine Spectator gave them all, they're more like Tasting Panel and Sommelier and, all things that have good reputations, wine enthusiasts, so not just, somebody that you haven't heard of, but the fact that we did such a good job under such adversity that first year and not knowing the property. You can't just walk onto a property and think you're going to start making 16 varieties. You don't even know what blocks and which ones are worthy.
Plus, we're not talking 10 anchors. We're talking 200.
Exactly. There was a lot of morning walks the first couple months. And, but those are the times you got to pinch yourself and say, they're paying me to walk in the vineyard in the morning?
So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
A table that needs a beer.
And, okay, so now I want you to imagine another scenario. We're sitting here at a table overlooking the beautiful vineyard. We've got a bottle of Notre Vue on the table. Who from any walk of life would you like to be sitting here drinking that wine with you?
Yeah. I actually, by listening to your other blogs, I prepared for this question.
You cheated.
And the first one that came to mind was John Lennon.
Ooh.
And the second one was Elvis. And the third is Tom Petty. So any three of those, I would be ecstatic. And John Lennon was certainly the one that came first to mind.
So, then the next question. What 3 wines would you take to a deserted island? And you can't say beer, and beer.
Yeah. Well, because see, dessert, you do mean a deserted tropical island.
It's any island you want. It could be outer space. Yeah. You just have to take 3 wines with you.
Yeah. Well, and, from that perspective, it's certainly, I think, this rosé right here would be a great choice. Any rosé, a Pinot Noir, and I'm restarting my love affair for Zinfandel. So the Zinfandel I made off of this property is really a nice Zinfandel, low alcohol French oak. Go figure.
Whoa. So now we're going to play a little game and pair it with music. I know that you're into music. Let's see what kind of style you're into. You've already mentioned John Lennon, Tom Petty, and Elvis, so musicians are on your mind. But just on some of the wines you're producing, let's start with your GSM sparkling wine. What does it make you think of?
Yeah, it's musically, it has to be a very subtle, low-key genre, and maybe I'll go somewhere like maybe Neil Young or something.
Okay.
And what old man maybe.
What about the GSM rosé that I'm sipping on right now?
Yeah. This one's a little interesting because it's a little less. It's a little more unusual, and I don't know. Maybe that's a Jimi Hendrix wine. I don't know, something more out of the norm.
Okay, and what about your GSM red? Just to go for the trifecta of your GSMs.
Yeah. Well, let's go with John Lennon Instant Karma.
Okay, and last but not least, your Zinfandel.
Well, Good question. Let me think about that for a second. How about Tom Petty's Wildflower?
You're good at this. I can keep going. So I know that you're pretty busy here and you're really drinking locally. But if there was one place at the top of your bucket list, one wine region, anywhere in the world, domestic or international, where would you want to go?
Yeah. In 2011, we took a trip around France, and so we hit all the areas in France: Alsace, Burgundy, Rhone, Loire Valley. Didn't actually make it to Bordeaux, but that was enough for what we were doing. The one place I haven't been that I really want to go, I guess, is Tuscany. I've been there before I was into wine, but I haven't been there since into wine. So I think that probably is a wine region, probably where I want it, the next place I want to go.
Well, Alex, you've done a very, very good job today. I think you should plan your trip to Tuscany. I really do. But I do think people should plan a trip up here to the Russian River Valley of Sonoma and come to Notre Vue because the views are utterly outstanding. Right. So if people want to come here, how can they find you, and when are you open, and where are you exactly for people to know?
Yeah, the website is NotreVueEstate.com, singular estate. And we're open every day except Tuesday, appointments. With the pandemic, obviously, and our fire, we don't really. It's ironic that I sense that we've sort of transformed for a lot of reasons to a lot of outdoor tastings, and so we have 3 areas that we actually can do outdoor events and tastings. So we have plenty of. We have a lakeside tasting. We have this terrace tasting that has more of a view, and we have a lot of events. So the website is where you go to make your appointments, and we're on all the digital appointment websites and whatnot. Great. So you can we serve lunches, charcuterie. So we have a lot of outdoors, just sort of chill environment, sit back and just relax, no high pressure tasting and all that. So we're really in tune with how we're tasting these days with the pandemic. And so our property has really been conducive to that.
Great. Well, check out Notre Vue Estate, book a tasting on the deck overlooking the valley. Sit back, put on your sunscreen, and enjoy. And Alex, thank you for joining us on Wine Soundtrack.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.